Thank you, Peter. Before I get started, I want to gauge the room here. I want to see if you can give me a one-word answer. What was your initial reaction to the title and description of this homily?
Yikes.
Curious.
Curiosity, yeah.
Also curious.
Okay, all right. See, I wasn't sure what to expect. I was trying to court controversy a little bit. I was trying to see if I could stir up some things, but I should have known with a UU congregation and audience that you folks would all be very open-minded and curious about it. However, I also know that many of us suffer from what I call PRSD, post-religious stress disorder. I know that for many of us, religion has been traumatic, and I know this because I've had many conversations with other UUs at your lovely sister church when I was a member there. I remember one conversation in particular where someone took exception with the word worship. And we were called worship associates back in those days when we would do what Peter was doing. And she came to me after and had to tell me that she was almost offended by the use of the word worship. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Why? And she said, because worship is for Jesus and it's for God, and that doesn't belong here. I said, oh, that's an interesting take. And it's one of many that I was exposed to. So I'm glad that you folks are a little bit more open to something that sounds like religious mumbo jumbo here. So it's with these interactions in mind that I stand before you today, grateful for another opportunity to share a story and to connect with you all. I wouldn't be presenting this topic here if I didn't feel safe in this space and if I didn't know that you're all open-minded, curious, intelligent, caring people. I'm also bringing you this topic because I think it's extremely important in light of what others have said already today about the state of the world and the divisions and the hatred and the war and the violence. I think now more than ever, we need to hear what this man we call Jesus was telling us. So here's the story, here's the headline, okay? It's pretty sensational. The Christ Conspiracy, a concerted and deliberate effort to tarnish, distort, and mask the character, the example, and the message of the man we call Jesus Christ, in order to keep the masses deluded, divided, and in suffering. Sound familiar? Divided, deluded, and suffering. Do you think it'll sell, by the way? Just based off of the title and the description? No, because it's a sales pitch for a book that I'm writing. So for the next 20 minutes, I'd like to invite you to bracket what you think you know, your opinions, even your associations with Christianity, and more importantly, with the man we call Jesus Christ. I ask you to set aside everything you think you know about him, including his own name, and open yourself up to new possibilities. Now, if at the end of this little experiment of ours you feel and think no differently on this subject, then you'll be no worse off. But on the other hand, if I succeed in piquing your interest and impressing upon you the magnitude of this situation, I think your relationship with Christ will change dramatically and for the better. I should also note that the story here that I'm about to share is interwoven with my own story. I can't really tell this story without getting into a little bit of my own story at the same time, because there's an obvious question. How does a self-described mystic who grew up without religion stumble onto this so-called Christ conspiracy? How did I come to this? And it's an interesting question because for years now, my quest has been to cure myself of the human condition. It's called a condition for a reason, my friends. There's nothing natural about the way we do things in this world, as you can tell by the state of the world. So my quest to cure myself of this condition has led me through many different traditions and disciplines. I've gone through Jungian psychology, I've hung out with Sufi mystics, the Neoplatonists, quantum physics. I've scoured the world in search of cures for the human condition. And in all these years of exploration, I never once felt any curiosity towards Jesus. I explored Taoism and Stoicism, and I went through and I read and I meditated, but never once did I think, I wonder what this Jesus guy has to say. But then about a year and a half ago, I suddenly became Christ curious. I felt this calling or this compulsion to get to know Christ. And by now I know better than to question these types of impulses when they arise in me. I know that I should trust them. But I had a problem. How does one come to know Christ? I guess I could go ask one of the many Christian denominations out there, but they all disagree on a whole bunch of points. And so how am I going to get to the bottom of it? How am I going to get to the essence of who this character really was? So here's what I did. I went to the Bible. But I have 3 kids and a full-time job, and I don't have time to read the whole thing. And plus, I was looking for something very specific in the Bible, right? I was trying to get to know Christ. And so here's what I did. I dropped the entire Old Testament. I did not even start reading in there. And then I also took everything after John's Gospel, Paul's letters, if you're familiar with the New Testament, and I set those aside because Paul isn't Jesus. And as it turns out, much of mainstream Christianity today is Pauline and not Christian. And so even though Paul has some worthwhile things to offer, I decided to set him aside because I wanted to focus exclusively on the character of Jesus as represented in the 4 Gospels. So that's what I did. I stuck with the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and, well, it was quite an experience because I was coming at it, like many of you, with the impressions of Christianity that I have, right? I have these views based on mainstream Christians and how they behave and what they believe and what they say. And so I wasn't ready for what Jesus actually says. We'll never know for certain what he said, by the way. We don't even know if he really existed, but that's not the point of this. I'm not interested in the historicity of Jesus. I'm interested in the character which has influenced civilization and human beings for literally thousands of years. And the only way to really know that character is through the Bible. And so here's what Jesus doesn't talk about. He doesn't talk about homosexuality. Never once mentions it. He doesn't talk about original sin. He doesn't talk about abortion or race. He never promotes war, never asks to be worshipped. In fact, he tells his disciples, not me, the Father, don't worship me. He never recommends revenge or retribution. And to the contrary, he preaches forgiveness. Carrying a grudge leads to everlasting destruction. Now, Lao Tzu, who is a Chinese transmitter of the same message, I would say, he says, someone must risk returning injury with kindness, or hostility will never turn to goodwill. Someone's got to take the high road. Well, Jesus, he had a similar message. And in fact, the reason that I didn't go into the Old Testament is precisely because Jesus constantly tells us in the Gospels that he's here to complete the law, the Mosaic law, the old ways. He's here to fulfill them. In other words, he's here to put all of that to rest. So instead of going and looking at the old stuff, I focused on the new. Like he says, you've heard it said before, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Another great teacher, Gautama, Siddhartha, he says, in this world, hate never yet dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. So the Buddha, Jesus, Lao Tzu, they're saying the same thing. It's a message that has been spoken before. And by the way, speaking of names, Christ isn't a last name. I'm sure most of you know that, but I wasn't that aware of it. I didn't realize. It's not like his driver's license said Jesus Christ, right? It's like Christ is a title, just like Buddha, right? We always call him the Buddha. Buddha means awakened one, and Christ means anointed one. So it's a title. So his name wasn't Jesus Christ. And in fact, Jesus, if we're going to be straight up about it, doesn't sound very Aramaic. Doesn't sound like a name that would have been around in those days. And so the name that I've heard used by scholars is Yeshua, which I quite enjoy. And so I think if we're going to get to know Christ, we should get to know his real name and maybe even use it sometimes if we're comfortable. So I'm going to use his real name for the rest of this talk. So one of the things that Yeshua did oppose was the established religious order and authorities of his day. His mission seemed to be one of reformation. He was trying to remove the middleman by leading people to a direct experience and connection with the divine within. So naturally, the middleman, the religious authorities of his day, they weren't very fond of him, and we can expect that. Now in the Gospels, the priests are constantly coming to Yeshua and trying to catch him. They're trying to ask him questions and trick him into saying something that's going to get him in trouble. And at one point, they come to him and they say, "Which is the greatest commandment in all of the law?" And Yeshua declares, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." So again, we don't need to go to the Old Testament. He boiled it down to the most essential pieces, right? So Yeshua, like many great teachers, taught a radical message. Love your neighbor and your enemy. Love everyone the way you love yourself. Whether you agree with this message or not, you have to admit that this is a profound and difficult directive. And it's a major departure from the old Mosaic law of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Again, seems a bit out of alignment with the Republicans and the GOP and a lot of people that claim to be followers of Christ. So let's see, what else does he say? Why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log sticking out of your own eye? Why are you judging and critiquing other people when you've got your own stuff to look at? So he preached a message of being non-judgmental and of focusing on your own betterment instead of trying to get involved in other people's business. What else does he say? He says, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's an interesting one. It sounds to me like he's saying this material world is transient and impermanent. And if you invest all of your importance in material things, the moths and the rats and the thieves are going to get it one day. But if you store up treasures for yourself in heaven, which is where your heart is, then nothing can touch it. So again, an interesting message, and one that we don't hear parroted very often, at least in my experience, in mainstream Christian circles. What's another good one? Mark 9:35. So you want the first place? Then take the last place. Be the servant of all. Be the servant of all. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Don't worry about the future. Be present. These are all very familiar messages. If you've read Eckhart Tolle, for example, The Power of Now, if you've studied other traditions that talk about surrendering and impermanence, that's what he was saying. That's what he's been saying all along, but you don't really hear that. And here's one of my favorites. This one really is, it's a bit of a mind-blowing one for me. Because he says, the kingdom of God will not come with observable signs, nor will people say, hey, there it is, or, oh, it's over there. For behold, the kingdom of God is within you. Within you. All of you. So this whole worshiping of Jesus as this unique, special one-of-a-kind type of guy. That's not what he was talking about at all. He was trying to point us to the kingdom of God within ourselves. But that's enough about his words. What can we learn from Yeshua's behavior and his actions? First thing, he hung out with the undesirables, the sick, the downtrodden, the outcasts, and the lowly people. And when he was criticized for keeping company with such individuals, he said to the critic, "It's not the healthy people who need a doctor, but the sick." In other words, he came to help, and who better to hang out with than people who need help? This seemed to be a foreign concept to the religious authorities of his day. Jesus sees through racial, ethnic, and cultural divisions. Taking the story of the Samaritan woman by the well, for example, he preaches to the woman, even though Samaritans and Jews are bitter enemies for generations before. Not only does he preach to this woman, he then goes to her village and hangs out in her village with all the Samaritans for 2 days. And when he leaves, guess what? They're all on board, baby. Because the message isn't just for one group of people. Jesus came to destroy boundaries. He came to unite with a universal message. And so I think Unitarian Universalism, you folks were ahead of the curve. I think you all got the handle on it long before the rest of us. Well, I could just keep going. There's so many examples, and like I said, this is a whole book that I'm writing, so there's a lot of material, but what I want to touch on last is perhaps one of the most interesting things I discovered in reading the Bible, and it's about the famous resurrection. In John chapter 20, verse 1, we hear that Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb to see the body of Yeshua. And of course, the stone has been rolled away and the tomb is empty. And so she turns over and Yeshua is standing beside her. And she turns to him, but she doesn't recognize him. Yeshua says to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" She supposes that he's a gardener. She thinks he's a gardener. She thinks he's a landscaper. She says, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." It's only after Yeshua talks to Mary and calls her by her name that she suddenly recognizes who it is. Another example. Just as day was breaking, Yeshua stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Yeshua. Yeshua said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said, "Cast your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast their net as instructed, and there's so many fish in the net that they can't even haul it back into the boat. And that's when they realize, the guy on the shore, that's Yeshua. Now, I've found these stories extremely odd. Because why wouldn't they recognize their master? Why wouldn't they recognize their rabbi, their teacher, the man that they loved and that they mourned for after he died? It's almost like the Christ was resurrected in a different body, one that Mary and his disciples did not recognize until they heard the voice of Christ speaking. If his body wasn't resurrected, then what was? If the physical form of Yeshua perished, what part of Yeshua was resurrected? Well, listen, you didn't come here for a Bible lesson, so let's just cut to the chase. Why is any of this relevant to you? It's relevant, in my opinion, because Yeshua, the man, the myth, the character, came to liberate everyone. He came to show us the light that is within each of us, a light that he discovered in himself, and he tried to show it in others. His teachings, his parables, and his example cast new light on the world and the human animal, this noble beast, blessed by the father of the cosmos. He came to bring a new way of operating as individuals and as a collective. He came to unify people by preaching a universal message that empowers and liberates. And he wasn't the first person to bring this message, but he was the first one to try and make it accessible to everyone, regardless of socioeconomic circumstances or ethnic background. He was a humanist, a psychologist with profound insight into human nature. He was a subversive revolutionary, a contrarian who goes against the grain, a trickster who outwits the religious and political authorities and goes out on his own terms. Above all, Yeshua did not come to be worshipped or believed in, but to help us find and access a part of ourselves that is both more essential, nobler, and higher than the personality with which we identify. It's this part of ourselves, not the man Yeshua, that we should honor and cherish. He rejected authority, except the authority of his own inner being, and he encouraged each of us to do the same thing, which brings us to the last stop on this journey. Why would anyone conspire to distort a message that liberates, empowers, and unites all people? Who would do such a thing? Well, it's not much of a conspiracy. It's in the record books. We need only go back to the Council of Nicaea and the men who created the Bible as we know it. Who were these men? Were they awakened ones? Were they Christ-like Buddha beings? No, they were politicians. Roman politicians decided, handpicked, every book in the Bible. So you have to understand, they didn't want this message getting out. And we know this because the first thing they did is they killed the messenger. But unfortunately, it was too late. And killing the messenger did nothing to prevent the message from spreading like wildfire. And so what happened at the Council of Nicaea was a good old-fashioned case of, if you can't beat them, join them. But they didn't just join them. They hijacked the Christian movement. They twisted it. They weaponized it. They set it in stone so that it could no longer change. And then they used it to enslave the very people who were meant to be liberated by Christ's message of unconditional love. Now it's being used to oppress, divide, and justify all kinds of atrocities. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think Yeshua would be rolling in his grave if he was in a grave. Even our knee-jerk reactions to the name Jesus Christ, which thankfully this audience doesn't seem to have a whole lot of hang-ups with, but a lot of people, you just mention Jesus Christ and they roll their eyes and they dismiss it out of hand. Well, that's part of the conspiracy. It's because Jesus Christ has been obscured by all of this extra nonsense, and so we can't even get to the heart of who he was and what he taught without doing a little bit of legwork ourselves. That's a lot for a Sunday morning. So my invitation to you, my friends, is to revisit, if you haven't already, the man, the myth, the character of Yeshua on your own terms, not through the filter of this denomination or that denomination. The Bible is readily available. There are amazing translations of it out there. If you want to know what Jesus said, you can find out for yourself. And I will tell you, it's nothing like what most mainstream Christians portray it to be. I will leave you with a quote from a writer named Jim Palmer. He says, "If you want to follow Jesus, break your dependency on the system and learn to follow the spirit of truth inside yourself." Jesus did not come to start a new religion. He came to set people free. Turning that freedom into a religion is entirely missing the point. There's a lot more to this story than what I've shared today, but my time's up. So I look forward to engaging with you all in the forum after the service, and I hope you'll be gentle with me. Thank you.